Hey, everybody. If you're listening to this, you are listening to the first free hour of this episode of The Shift with Doug McKenty. If you like what you're hearing, please consider subscribing to the show in order to access the full feature-length versions of the podcast, as well as have access to the members forum, where we discuss potential topics and interviews and dive deep into the overall concept of the shift. For only $6 a month, not only do you get the full-length episodes, but also an opportunity to co-create with me, your host, Doug McKenty, the future of the show. Go to www.theshiftnow.com or patreon.com/theshift and sign up today in order to help make the shift possible. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Good morning, noon, or night, wherever and whenever you are listening to The Shift. I am your host. My name is Doug McKenty. This is episode 50 of The Shift, recorded on August 17th, 2020. Find out more about the show on YouTube and Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty. I'm on Twitter at @DMcKenty, or find all of my episodes and other work at theshiftnow.com. My guest on the program today is author, political activist, and citizen journalist Derrick Broze. Derrick overcame a troubled youth characterized by drug addiction and depression issues that ultimately resulted in incarceration. After spending his 21st birthday in jail, he resolved to make positive life changes that placed him on the path toward personal and political liberation. For the last 15 years, he has been dedicated to researching and reporting on current events from outside the corporate government narrative. His work reflects a dedication to the ideas of freedom, with a refreshing connection to spiritual and psychological healing that is uncommon in the arena of political philosophy. Teaming up with co-author John Vibes, Derrick produced the Conscious Resistance trilogy that reflects a modern extension of the concept of agorism, first put forth by the late libertarian thinker Samuel Konkin III. These ideas are further extrapolated in his most recent solo work entitled How to Opt Out of the Technochratic State, in which Broze continues to elaborate on the agorist concept of resistance through non-involvement in the corporate government agenda. He advocates the creation of a marketplace separate from systems of distribution controlled by what he calls the predator class, utilizing gray and black markets to circumvent the dominant economic paradigm. Not stopping at producing books, Derrick is a prolific journalist as well. His most recent blog posts can be found at thelastamericanvagabond.com, where he has recently covered the current coronavirus pandemic as well as myriad other current events from an alternative perspective. His recent documentary film, The 5G Trojan Horse, describes the dangers of microwave proliferation and his attempts at educating the City Council of Houston, Texas, while they were insistent on fast-tracking the new technology despite the lack of any quality safety assessment. This activism eventually compelled Derrick to make a run for mayor of Houston in order to spread the word. Finally, Derrick and fellow activist John Bush have developed the Freedom Cell concept in order to network like-minded individuals internationally into a non-hierarchical peer-to-peer organization where the conscious agora can become realized through individual and collective action. Become involved and discover others near you at freedomcell.org. I would like to urge my listeners to find out more about Derrick and check out all of his work at www.theconsciousresistance.com. And I'd like to welcome author, activist, journalist, and documentary producer Derrick Broze to the podcast. Thank you for helping to make the shift. All right, everybody. I'm here today with citizen journalist Derrick Broze. It's been a little while. I've been wanting to get him on the show. I really love his work. I've probably been following you for 5 years or so. It's been a long time. I think I heard you. I was trying to remember on the Corbett Report years ago, and then just been following you ever since. I'm really happy to see that you're with Ryan over at the Last American Vagabond now. So really easy to catch all of your work over there. And why don't we just kick it in? You want to give my audience a little bit of your history and what you're up to and what you're doing, and then we'll get into the meat of it today.
Sure, man. Thanks for having me on, and appreciate all the work that you're doing as well. I'm, as you mentioned, kind of an freelance investigative journalist. I'm based here in Houston, Texas. Been here most of my life, and will not be here for very much longer, considering a lot of things going on in the world. But my work has been based in Houston for the last 10 years. Started just getting involved with activism 2010, kind of waking up to the Federal Reserve System, waking up to the banking system, a lot of those types of issues, getting into health for a while, and just going down all those rabbit holes, and it really did completely alter the course of my life and the path I was on. And started an activist group called the Houston Freethinkers, and was really active between 2010 and 2016, involved in a lot of big protests and just city council meetings, confronting Henry Kissinger, all kinds of different things, building community gardens. We had a couple of community houses that I lived in, and we did skill shares and garden days and music events and all kinds of stuff, just really trying to be connected and plugged into the community and spreading the ideas that were important to us. And about 2012, I met John Vibes, who is my writing partner for my first three books, and he helped me get connected to some people, just different websites and people in the independent media, and that's when I really started getting paid to do my writing. I was kind of just at first blogging on the Houston Freethinkers website about things that were important to me, and we would aggregate other news and just kind of had a website like that. And then I met John, and I met also my buddy Nick, who used to run the Anti-Media, which was a really big website and Facebook page until we were purged in 2018. And basically, we started working together, and I started writing articles, and over time developed more of an interest in really understanding journalism, because I didn't go to school for journalism and don't have a quote unquote traditional background in it. And so I have taken journalism classes sort of on my own, and tried to learn what I could from the mainstream, as well as just learning that, if you've got a camera and if you've got dedication and curiosity, you can go out there and be a journalist, in the truest sense of what that means. I also got a radio show, which I still have today. It's called Freethinker Radio. We started in 2011 and have been doing it since then. In the last 2 years or so, we joined 90.1 KPFT, which is on the FM radio here in Houston. So it's really cool because I get to push the boundaries about what's allowed by the FCC and the station, which is mostly progressive, left-leaning people. But the station manager who welcomed us on board basically said, you know what, your guys' opinions are probably going to piss off a lot of our core listeners, but it'll be good radio, so let's do it. And they know that the show's Freethinker Radio, right? So we have people call in and tell us that they hate everything we're talking about, and they wish they would take us off the air. And we have people say, thank you for talking about these ideas, and we let everybody express their opinions. And sometimes people are angry, but it's a fun opportunity. But yeah, so I did that, and then prior to that, I started working for the radio station. I started going out and doing in the field reporting, either calling in on the scene from some event, or recording and producing my own stories and then sending them into the radio. So I got a lot of more like mainstream journalism experience after coming more from the street activism side of things, and now just try to really dedicate my journalistic side of my work towards true investigative fact-based journalism, and of course healthy speculation when necessary, when needed. And I've written 5 books, do public speaking, and yeah. So I mean, I have a whole other story of how I got into it prior to this, that involves drug addiction and going to prison and stuff. And that was kind of the beginning of everything I'm on now, because my work, the book series and the website is called The Conscious Resistance. And that to me is not just a kind of a catchy name or anything, but it's really the meaning of the philosophy that I try to promote and live by, and that is that the struggle for a more free and ethical world is not going to come from only confronting the physical institutions of power, the government or the corporations or the families or the institutions or whatever we point our finger at, but from also, definitely that's a part of it, but then the other side is working on our own healing and our own trauma and our own self-doubt and insecurities to do that individually and collectively to help us move forward, because I do think if we just get rid of the guy on the throne, and just replace him with somebody else, or we become the people on the throne, we're just as likely to fall prey to some of the same things if we don't do that deeper healing or shadow work, as some people like to call it. But yeah, that's kind of the short version of who I am and what I'm doing. And these days, I mean, I'm producing documentaries, working on new books, producing YouTube videos, writing articles, as you mentioned, for The Last American Vagabond. And yeah.
Yeah, you've been really busy. I really appreciate that you took the time to have this conversation with me today, for sure. So many places to go from here. I do want to point out that this kind of shadow work that you're talking about, I think is something that is really unique that you bring to this whole scene. So I really appreciate that. We could get into that a little bit more and what you're doing at the Conscious Resistance .com and that whole network, because I think it is really important that people, I mean, we kind of get into getting into the news, and then you sort of get woken up to what's going on. I guess if you get more into this sort of conspiracy theory, or I like to just call it independent media. But there does come a point, I think, in all of us where we have to realize that we need to be working on ourselves, and that it's a personal journey to kind of get through, I guess, what you might call this awakening process, or this understanding that what we're getting in the mainstream media and in the education system isn't really an accurate depiction about what's going on in the world. You want to touch on this a little bit more, like this kind of spiritual aspect? We can get into the. I want to kind of start with the new book too, how to opt out of the technocratic state. So you could, interrelate it to that and what's going on in terms of this technocracy that you see coming, and what to do about that.
Sure. Should we start with the personal work and then lead into the technocracy?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, I mean, like I mentioned a moment ago briefly, that my journey, I mean, everything I just shared about my activism and journalism is 2010 to 2020, so the last decade. But the reason I came to the awareness of, I mean, the phrase really was kind of whispered into my head, like the conscious resistance. It just sort of popped in there one day, and I had after 2010, when I first had my kind of awakening experience and going through the freak out mode, I go, oh my God, this is about to happen. What I like to call the Alex Jones phase. I moved past that and started thinking about solutions, and like, okay, I'm going to form an activist group. I'm going to go talk to people. I need to pass out flyers. I was already a promoter before this, so it was very much kind of in my blood to get out on the streets and put flyers out and put up posters. And so I just started changing the message, about what I was promoting. And then also I started working with different musicians and artists who were interested in doing an anti-drug war show, doing an anti-war show, and starting to form like a community of activists and musicians and artists. And we would bring out vendors, local vendors making their own stuff. And so it was really cool. I could start to see who actually gave a shit in the Houston community, and who was kind of like, yeah, it's not really, we're just here to play music kind of thing. So I already had some of that stuff going on, and I just shifted my direction. But after doing that for a couple of years, Houston Freethinkers music and all that, in 2013, the summer of 2013, I kind of had like a deeper shift where I was just going down the rabbit holes again. And I had another 3 or 4 days of no sleep and just research and just going real deep. And if I remember correctly, I was listening to a lot of David Icke at the time, some of his real long talks. And, I don't agree with David on everything, but there's definitely a lot of inspiration you can take from his speeches and stuff. And so I just remember being really kind of engaged with what he was saying. And over that period of not really getting sleep, going all these different rabbit holes, that phrase, the conscious resistance, came to me. And it sort of helped me remember where my journey had began, because in 2005, I was 20 years old, and I'd spent basically the whole 20th year of my life addicted to various drugs, starting with crystal meth and, going kind of all the way down until I ended up locked up. And that was preceded by a couple of years of hopping around from drinking a lot and doing this and doing this. And it wasn't till a little while later, my life was able to sit back and kind of reflect on this. At the time, it was all just a haze. It's just chaos. I'm just bouncing around, going from one thing to the other. But I ended up getting locked up the week before I turned 21, and I was able to get myself sober before I went to prison. But I had already quit on my own. I ended up living in this crazy crack meth house, and I really committed that this is not the life I want. I need to get the heck out of here. And cannabis did help me. My anxiety was so messed up from just doing so many of these stimulants, cocaine and crystal and all this crazy stuff, that thankfully didn't fry my brain. And cannabis helped me kind of just for about a week straight. I remember just like smoking a lot of weed and just telling these people, I don't want any other drugs. Please don't offer me anything. Just like, let me be. I'm really trying to get through this. And they respected that. And every day that passed, as I got a little more calm and kind of could hold my nerves together, I just started to see how insane the situation I was in, and what the hell am I doing here? How did I end up here? And I had a vehicle. Yeah. I could leave at any time, but I'd burned a lot of bridges, including with my parents, and it just felt like I had nowhere to go. After about a week, I decided, this is it. I got to go. I'm out of here. I got in the car, drove home to my family, told my mom, I'm really trying to get my shit together. So please, whatever it takes, let me come home. And I got myself sober, but I owed some people some money, and more than even being addicted to drugs, I kind of had become addicted to the lifestyle of selling drugs and being around that, and, just that whole thing. And so I knew I could make some money really quickly buying some crystal and, getting rid of that. And it's just one of those kind of stories of that one final time, and I ended up getting pulled over with all these drugs in my car, and that was it, And so spent my 21st birthday locked up in the county, waiting to get sent to state jail, state prison. And I did 11 months the first time, 2005, late 2005 into 2006, and then I was out for about 5 months, went back for another 3 months, and was out for about a year, and then I did final 4 months. So in between 2005, 2008, I did 18 months, and I ended up getting a felony for possession of controlled substance, and in finishing all that stuff out. But it was in that space when I first got locked up that I really started to do the reflecting and started to ask myself, like, how the hell did I get here? This place is not for me, And the other thing is, I grew up as a very young kid visiting my father in prison for his drug addiction. My earliest memories are being 5 years old, going into a prison and seeing him there and having all these questions, trying to integrate these experiences as a young kid, and hearing constantly that he was in jail for drugs, having no idea what drugs are, but I just keep hearing about these things. Whatever they are, they've affected my life greatly, And I think it really just made me curious, like growing up, like, I need to know what are drugs, because they've got my dad in jail. Everybody's telling me they're bad. I don't even know what the heck it is. But I just grew up with that experience. So here I am finding myself locked up at the same time he's locked up. It was a real kick in the nuts. It was a real gut check of like, wow, what am I doing? And I started journaling every day. I started to get my girlfriend at the time to send me a chapter a day of the Buddhist Bible, the Dhammapada, and was really kind of integrating those lessons. And then my grandma sent me a book about like Zen meditation, Zazen, and started meditating every day. And the journaling really helped me. I started noticing that, like, when I first got there, my handwriting was really, in that everyday sort of fast-paced kind of feeling. But then over time, as I'm in this prison and I come to accept there's nobody here that can help me. I can call my mom, my girlfriend, my lawyer, whoever. Like, I have to accept I'm here. Like, look at the calendar. I'm not going home for at least, this amount of time. It's actually a very empowering feeling, even though it's disempowering at first, because you have to really accept that, like, wow, there's nothing I can do. There's nobody I can call to cry to, dad, mom, girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, whatever, to fix this for me. I'm here, I'm alone, and I have to face this. And there's a lot of fear, and because you don't want to. I see people who are like, they're on the phone every day talking to their family, just trying to hold on to that, but it slows your time down. So I had to accept, like, all right, I have no control over what my family's doing, what my girlfriend's doing, whatever's going on out there. Just be here, right? And that really did help me start to analyze my life and look back and see that a lot of my drug use was linked to my depression, and I had actually tried to kill myself several times as a high school kid, and that these things root back to my relationship with my father. So my point with all this is to say that, like, once I started slowing down and started looking at my own life and actually going through this process, which ended up turning into another one of my books, the Holistic Self-Assessment, is basically the kind of take people through the process I did when I was locked up. Once I started to do that, I started to see that there was these deeper roots of my trauma, and it helped me let go of my depression and helped me let go of my desire to stick as many drugs inside of my body as possible and see if I could get happiness that way. And to start, like, when I got out after all that, it felt like this cloud had been lifted. Like, not only the cloud of just the haze of drug use all the time, but the cloud of like depression and just heaviness that I felt. I was starting to be able to enjoy a sunset for the first time and just really be thankful for life, and to start to kind of reconcile with my father and just tell him, like, I forgive you. I'm an adult now. Like, everything that happened for a reason. Please, let go of that guilt that you have. I'm okay. And so, yeah, it started really a lot of my healing process. And that was before I ever knew anything about any of this stuff, So that happened to me first, cool. 2005, 2008. 2008, I started hearing about Anonymous and and then, led into everything else I was describing, the Houston Freethinkers. But that happened for me first. And that's why it has become such an important part of my work. Whenever the phrase the conscious resistance came back to me, it was this realization that, like, I can't ignore that other side. I kind of had two different lives. I had my activist friends and my meditation consciousness friends. And I had been keeping them separate for those first couple of years because it seemed like people weren't interested in the balance, but eventually it just became clear to me that they were the same struggle. So yeah, that's kind of that side of my work, and I do think that it's valuable. And it's been interesting to me to see that since I first started talking about the spiritual, specifically like spirituality and anarchism and self-governance and stuff like that, that since 2013, here we are, 2020, there's a lot more people exploring that area of philosophy and research, and that's really awesome to see.
Yeah.
And as far as the technocracy that many people are becoming aware of, that we're facing, that we're dealing with, that we've already been facing, but that COVID-19 has only accelerated and given this sort of 24-hour, 24/7 excuse, just like 9/11, for whatever you want. You can grow a police state right now at any rate you like. If you say it's for COVID, that's basically like a free pass for all the politicians and all the authoritarians. I put out this book January 31st, I think, is when it was finally published, throughout last year, 2019. Because as a journalist, I've been writing about facial recognition technology for years, stingray cell phone surveillance, drones, heat detectors that can see inside your house and tell how many people are watching, fusion centers, the Utah data, and all the stuff that's been going on. Anybody who's been paying attention can see the direction we're headed. Like no privacy, complete erosion of individual liberty, and a lot of it powered by the big tech companies. So I was already writing this book last year, trying to imagine how the solutions that I promote, which is mainly opting out of everything you can and trying to be invested in morally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, etc., in better systems, or either building them or supporting newer systems that already exist. And really started to think about, well, how does that work in a world where social credit scores are around, where if you say the wrong thing, your score goes down, or if you do the wrong thing, your score goes down. So what's the answer to that for those of us who clearly are not playing ball and have our own, thoughts and ideas about how we want to live our lives that don't that don't really align with the mainstream system, right? So I try to be forward thinking. I try to think of what's coming next and how we can be proactive rather than just reactive, which is mainly what activism tends to be. So I really started putting this book together that I wanted to explain what the philosophy of opting out, specifically agorism, counter economics, is about, and who Samuel Konkin was. I've written about it before, but try to expand upon it in the specific context of the technocracy, because Samuel Konkin, who is the founder of the philosophy of agorism, which comes from the Greek word agora, and it's been heavily influential on my work. He died in 2004, and a lot of things he predicted have come to fruition, but he also had an unfinished book that never got published, or he tried to get published and he just couldn't find any publishers, probably because it was fairly radical, especially when he was trying to publish it in the 1990s. And he was already thinking about some of these ideas, but he unfortunately never finished it. We have his full outline. We have some finished chapters and all these different things. And as a nerd for his work and somebody who really believes in it, I decided, okay, I want to bring his work into the modern age, the digital age. How do you do these things? How do you opt out when you got facial recognition cameras everywhere? When you have, and I didn't even know immunity passports were coming, but now that's the question, right? How do we opt out with immunity passports? How do you do these things? He was already thinking about these ideas, but his work is sort of lost to the pages of history. Nobody really knows much about him. And this final book, I'd never even read it. So once it finally got put online by one of his friends, I decided I'm going to write a book that explains his philosophy and updates it to the digital age, and hopefully introduces it to new people. Then also addresses these questions of how do you do counter economics? How do you be an agorist or somebody who wants to opt out in the digital age and the technocracy? And then also I included his full final writing of everything for people who want to nerd out on that stuff. But to me, the answer is clearly it is to opt out and to plan ahead and think ahead. And whether that means you want to leave the United States or leave whatever country you are in because you think it's getting more oppressive, especially if you're in, say, New Zealand or Australia. Even if you think you want to stay there, you're not ready to leave, you can still start preparing for this rollout of technocracy, which is already existing, by trying to get off their grid as much as possible, step by step, not being overwhelmed by the big task that is. But also the most important thing is the community aspect of bringing people together, because whether you're in the city, you're in the suburbs, you're in the country, you're out in the jungles, you're off on an island, whatever, having community of people to support each other, to lean on, to get things done faster. I mean, it's really practical on that level, is going to be extremely important, especially because if we're all spread out, I mean, Doug, you're in California, right? I think you said you're in California. Yeah. So you're in California. I'm in Texas right now. We know people all around the country, and it's great that we can communicate and share these ideas. But at the end of the day, if they come to your house and try to force vaccinate you or starve you out because you're not saying the right things or doing the right things or don't want to wear a mask, I'm not much help to you in Houston. I can let people know, but we really need localized support. So that's the importance of. To me, that is the answer. Whether you're going to go out into the country or you're going to stay in the city, having some support system, whether you're neighbors or just down the road or even just in the same city, that when things are getting tough, you can count on each other, you can come together. And we call those groups freedom cells. And I kind of expand upon that in the book as well. But I wanted it to be as direct as how-to of a guide as possible, giving various ideas. Of course, it's just the conversation starter. I can't think of every possible solution there is, but hopefully get people to realize, like, hey, there's a need for this. Like, a lot of people don't even really know what technocracy is. And some people, even I would say in the circles we run, might not realize that it's as urgent as it appears to be now. And like I said, I wrote this prior to COVID. If I'd waited a couple more weeks to publish it, I would have had to update it with including immunity passports and all kinds of things in there. So yeah, but that's kind of the gist of the book, and I do think that it came out in January, and it's now more timely than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. It is funny. It's like you said. I mean, when COVID came out, suddenly there was this whole other level of stuff going on that I didn't even know was happening. Like, I think we all had an understanding that there was this general move towards technocracy, but no idea how far along they were. And then you get, all of a sudden there's COVID, and it's like, what's really going on here? And you start peeling back the layers, and it's like, oh my God, this is the stuff they've been planning for the last decade. And here's all the companies, and here's everything that's lined up, like you're talking about, the immunity passports, the social credit scores, it's just, it becomes insane. But I think before we get too deep into the COVID stuff, I still want to like really flesh out some of these ideas about especially the spirituality and then the anarchy. I think for me, like, I started out, I guess, basically as a kind of as a libertarian, and then basically kind of just rejected the whole idea of government through Murray Rothbard initially. And then over time, I've actually become, because it's so fascinating in the world of anarchy, there's so many different ways to be an anarchist. And once you separate your mind, and I think there's a spiritual component to all of this too. I mean, people are they're engaged with the government, and they believe that there's this authority figure over them. It's a psychological transition to suddenly go, wait a minute, this thing doesn't actually exist, right? This is just somebody teaching me that they're an authority. But if I take responsibility for my life, then I can be my own authority, and I don't need this, this higher power to tell me what to do. And maybe we can even build a civilization on this notion that humans can just take care of themselves, so there's so many different places to go. And then this was the fascinating thing, actually, about getting to know your influences in terms of this agorism, because I didn't know very much about it. I mean, I kind of gravitated, I learned a lot about more of the left-wing anarchism, and then graduated more to calling myself, say, like a voluntarist. I think people should just be allowed to do what they want to do as long as they're not hurting somebody else. I mean, and then working together in community, there's all sorts of ways to do that on a voluntary basis. And when I think about that, I get into a lot of the more left-wing types of anarchy, where I could see people working, as long as it was voluntary, they could be working collectively or cooperatively, or in all of these different ways of building a society that's not based on these top-down hierarchies and all of this. So there's a lot of different ways of thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, maybe just kind of go into what agorism is more specifically, just for a little while, and maybe comment too on some of the psychological aspects of just getting into anarchy in general, and how that maybe opened your mind, or allowed you to be more attracted to some of these more spiritual concepts.
Yeah, definitely. That there's so much in there, right, to get into. So it's interesting you mentioned Rothbard, because definitely Rothbard is somebody who I can appreciate, and did have an influence on some of my views, particularly his time period. I would say mid '60s to 65 to probably 68 or 69 ish, maybe even into early 70, before the creation of the Libertarian Party, which was when Murray Rothbard was the most radical, when he actually was kind of part of this coalition that worked with Samuel Konkin, the founder of Agorism. And, they had mutual respect for each other, although Konkin thought that Agorism would be limited, or at least at his time was limited as far as mass appeal, mainstream appeal. I think Konkin's views over time are starting to pan out, because he did believe in something that was going to be a generational change that we'll explain in a moment. But yeah, I mean, Rothbard was a huge influence for sure at the beginning of my anarchist journey, particularly that time period. And also, I mean, beginning in 2013, I started to speak publicly, and it was at libertarian events mainly. And 2013 and 2016, very much involved in, the liberty movement and just kind of trying to put my ideas forward. John and I started releasing our books, our first book, Reflections on Anarchy and Spirituality, which explained this whole concept, and also got into agorism and mutualism and tried to find some of those common grounds between left and, I don't even like to divide them that way, but between the different shades of anarchism out there. And, and really started developing it. And it's cool because we're actually in the process of republishing the 5th anniversary edition of the Conscious Resistance trilogy as one book. And we've gone back, and it's cool to see my thoughts 5 years ago, especially in anarchism, which most of them, I think, I'm kind of now like a little embarrassed of some of them. Like, oh man, it was a really basic understanding. Not to say that the information wasn't good, but just now I have such a more rich and full understanding, including what you're talking about, of getting to know these other schools of thought, right? And to really appreciate some of the good things, and then also understand where some of the lines are of like, okay, this is where we part ways. And I think that in my experience of being involved with the liberty movement, who are mainly the anarchist variety of would just say voluntarist, which I think any true anarchist of any stripe, whatever their economic school is a voluntarist, or otherwise you're an authoritarian masquerading as an anarchist. Right. But whatever, most of the anarchists that I knew were anarcho-capitalists or just libertarians or just voluntarists, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I appreciate it. I definitely learned a lot in that time period, but I also started to see a lot of the limitations of their thinking and how many of them were very stuck in just another layer of the left-right paradigm, just always fighting anarcho-communists or whoever else, right? And how I started to realize that neither side really read each other's work and really understood each other's philosophy. I grew up with the activism that I was involved in the early years was very much in a left anarchist culture of having like small bookstores, info shops where people are holding concerts, and there's food not bombs, and like all the things that I really appreciated, which were people like taking action and getting involved. Whereas my experience with a lot of the libertarians and anarcho-capitalists they're more philosophical, and I enjoy both sides of it, but it just seemed like the limitations of anarcho-capitalists, where they talk about how this society could exist, but not many of them are actually actively out there trying to show people that it can exist now. Like they're just like, oh, one day we'll get there. Whereas at least the left-leaning anarchists and sort of radicals that I knew were out there feeding the homeless. They were out there doing activities in the community, getting organized. And so I learned a lot from that. That was a very influential part of my philosophical upbringing. Yeah. But again, I also could recognize the limitations. Recognize the limitations of just their thinking, and yeah, so I started to discover all these different things, these nuances, and Konkin to me fits kind of, again, it's a spectrum, but he fits fairly well in the middle. Like mostly he leans a little more left than some anarcho-capitalists, but he's not like this far leftist who believes like the violence is necessary at the moment, or just different things like that. And he also has a very nuanced view of property and just different things that I really appreciate. But at the end of the day, he's a voluntarist libertarian who believes in the non-aggression principle. You know what I mean? And he just might give weight and explain things in certain different ways. But his philosophy, which he called agorism, which, as I mentioned earlier, comes from the Greek word for marketplace. And so, again, he was you could call him a left libertarian. You could call him, he liked the term new libertarian, because he was very much playing on the language of the 60s. Again, when him and Rothbard were part of Rothbard was a little bit older, but Konkin was actually a student in the 1960s counterculture movement, when there was a lot of libertarians and radical leftists, like the Students for a Democratic Society, the Young Americans for Liberty, Young Americans for Freedom. And, there's a big thing in 1968 where they're burning draft cards. Like the libertarian movement pretty much started there, the American libertarian movement. And Konkin was around for that. Rothbard was like 10 years older than everybody, kind of advising them, and was there, as well as Carl Hess and some other really awesome anarchists of the time. And they were trying all kinds of different tactics. Konkin used the terminology of the time. He called himself a new libertarian because there was the new left that was emerging, and he was trying to differentiate himself from the libertarians of the time who were associating with the conservatives, like there are today. There are many people who think that libertarianism is exclusively a right-wing conservative kind of thing, and they eschew working with leftists. That largely comes from Rothbard, because of Rothbard's later opinions, where he said, like, there's no hope in the left. We got to work with the conservatives. Right. There might be some truth to that, but it's just interesting how the things that were done there in the 1960s set the tone for what we're still dealing with here as freedom seekers, and anarchists, etc. 70 years later, 60, 70 years later. So it's really interesting. But yeah, in that time period, as Konkin was seeing all the protest movements and seeing people get beat up by cops and seeing some of the uprisings and seeing it go nowhere and seeing the anti-draft movement. Then eventually, a couple years later, that movement, in some ways leading to the creation of the Libertarian Party in 1971, he saw that as a complete selling out of the principles that Libertarian was founded on. It was the most vocal critic of the Libertarian Party from the very beginning. And he termed it partyarchy, the idea that you could achieve, liberation or freedom of the party system. And so he started doing some research and some thinking. Okay, if I'm going to reject voting, not only as in his mind it was an ineffective strategy, but he did view it as inconsistent with libertarian principles taken to their fullest extent. He would also maybe use the term radical libertarian for himself and others. So he rejected voting on a moral standpoint as well as the strategic standpoint. And then he also rejected violence and said, like, not only are we outgunned and outnumbered, but it's just not a moral strategy. We're not going to gain mass support by going out and being terrorists, is essentially what they would call us. Even if we feel like our arguments or our use of violence is justified, we would be demonized. So he's like, you're not going to win that way. And so he eliminates voting, eliminates violence, and starts thinking about what are the other options that I have? What are the other strategies? And he kind of comes up with a third way, or a middle path, which, again, to me, relates it back a little bit to spirituality, because the Buddha also talked about the middle path as well, about not having the extreme materialistic world, of being of the world so much you get lost in it, but also not trying to starve yourself or, completely deny yourself joy in life as if it's somehow getting you closer to enlightenment. He talked about the middle path. So Konkin was sort of on the same idea. And his middle path that he saw was, rather than voting them out, rather than trying to commit violence, the goal then should be to try to siphon power away from them whenever possible, to opt out of their systems, particularly the economic system, by trying to use alternative currencies and get away from the central banking system and all that. But also, the idea of voting with your dollar. People understand it. Well, I don't like Walmart, so I'm not going to shop there. I don't like McDonald's or whatever. But you can apply that to the government itself. Try to resist paying taxes whenever possible. Try to limit your use of the dollar, or you only use cash so that, there are no taxes being paid and things like that. Whenever you have the opportunity, doing different types of exchanges, but also the moral support and the spiritual support, I would say, of this system as well. Not just your money, but your time, your energy, and I apply it across the board. It's not just a government thing. So if you don't like the way the banks are robbing us blind and funding all these crazy projects, we'll find a way around using them or working with them, and different ideas like that. That's really what what he termed counter economics comes to. And again, he using the terminology of the time. You had the counterculture. He was trying to tap into that. He called it the counter economy. And it's also sometimes known as the informal economy or the underground economy. The French call it System D. And it's actually a very well-researched topic that I do go into how to opt out of the technocratic state, and give some examples, as well as my third book, Manifesto of the Free Humans, and show that the underground economy, the counter economy, what Konkin realized back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and is even more true now, is that that's actually the largest economy in the world. It's bigger than any one nation, the economy of people who are untaxed, who are unregulated. And much of the world in the quote-unquote third world lives that way, which is why these people want technocracy, because they want everybody to have a digital ID so that they can have, digital currency to track and trace, because all these people out there are doing exchanges that are not going into the tax farm or whatever.
Yeah.
You can't have that,
Yeah, that's interesting, because I've been thinking a lot about this myself lately, just in terms of how many people actually are not. I mean, there's a lot of, and I tend to kind of take this into more of a, and when I think about the different forms of consciousness, I think about like the people that have been influenced, say, by the Roman Empire over time, and then the indigenous people who are still, believe it or not, there's still a lot of indigenous people around, and they're not participating. And I came to the realization that, like, my God, there's a lot of people who are just still indigenous. I mean, I was raised within the system, I think, and you were raised within the system, but I've learned a lot about, indigenous thinking too. And other ways of thinking that are outside of this way of thinking that I was brought up in. And it's actually surprising to realize that, like, I mean, I think from the point of view of, whatever you want to call it, the colonizers, or, this hierarchical system that's been sort of growing and growing over the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, from the top of that pyramid, they're seeing that there's a lot of people that they still want to hoover up into the system. All of this, this, like what you're talking about, the counter economy, the underground economy that's happening. There's still so many people that aren't participating, and what a better way than to suddenly have to, well, everybody's got to get contact traced, right? Everybody's got to participate in the system now. Nobody can spend cash. It's all digital currency. I mean, just going more and more into this so that they can kind of hoover up the last of the free people, if you will, that are still outside the system. But I mean, I did kind of want to bring up with you while I have you here that I live here in Northern California, where we've just been making this transition. Like, this economy was essentially an agorist economy for the last probably 30 years because of the cannabis industry here, which just went underground. We had a totally separate economy. It was it was probably 80% cash, the whole community here. It was like, it's something that wasn't necessarily spoken about, but it was something that was, almost everybody participated in one way or the other. And it was, the biggest cash crop in the area for sure. And so it's been actually really fascinating to see what's happened with legalization, because the corporate entity is moving in and taking over a lot of the small farms, and that counter economy that so many people were happy to participate in is now getting reabsorbed into the larger corporate structure. So you can see how easily it can be done. Actually, the farmers that are doing the best around here now are the ones that still are outside of the system, because the corporate system they put up so many barriers to entry. It's so expensive to participate. 10 years ago, you could throw a couple seeds in the ground and make a few $1,000 at the end of the summer. And now, if you're trying to participate in the legal system, it's $100,000+ to even. You've got to hire the lawyer and the accountant and have hundreds of thousands of dollars invested. You're starting a company.
Yeah, and like you said, as far as the barriers to entry, this is basically Konkin didn't just choose the counter economy and stumble upon it because he thought, like, let's get away from them. Like, obviously that makes sense, but because he studied it and could see that, particularly in his time, he was looking at the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, the harder they clamped down, they still had a huge black market. Just like with North Korea, people are still funneling things in through USB drives, movies, and whatever else. Like, no matter how hard the state clamps down, people will find a way to participate. If they got to go back to the old currencies, if they got to barter, whatever they got to do, if they, cash can become illegal, but there still will be a market for it. And Konkin showed in a lot of his research that, as you were mentioning, that once things become legal, which is basically the state getting involved and the state control of the market, that's what he would call the white market. Whereas the counter economy, you have the gray and the black market. Some people hear black market and they think of mobsters and violence, but Konkin, being a voluntarist and believing in the non-aggression principle, he considered the gray and black market basically all the economic exchanges that are either illegal or they're illicit because you don't have permits, you don't have licenses, etc., that the state says are illegal, but not, are not causing any harm or inflicting on anybody. So that would be selling cannabis, for example, if it's illegal in a certain place, or even if it's legal but you're doing it under the table, that's gray market, right? And then selling maybe weapons to somebody, or just all kinds of different things that don't necessarily have to be criminal activities, but they're things that have been criminalized by the state, whether they're actually violent or not. And so his idea was, if we can do as much of our exchanging in this counter economy, in this gray and black market, people are going to start siphoning economic power away from the state, and hopefully lessening their opportunity for taxing people to go to war and to do all these different things. But not only that, but that as your neighbors and your friends are seeing how happy you are kind of exiting from these systems, and maybe you're getting to keep more of your money in your pockets and thus in your own community, instead of going to the corporations you were talking about, or going to the government, tax farm, whatever it may be, people are going to start to understand that, oh, this seems like a better way to live. And his idea was that he kind of described these 4 stages society would move forward. And he believed that as the state becomes more aggressive, which we're seeing constantly and definitely right now, that the process, it kind of wakes some people up, which I think we are seeing with COVID too, is yes, there's a lot of people who are totally buying into this, but more people who are also like, whoa, this is kind of extreme. Maybe I'm actually ready to look into this. And that's just sort of a reaction that happens. And so for those of us who are already opting out and already trying to get off grid or promote these solutions, the people who are just starting to pay attention, they see that and they're inspired by that. And his idea that would just progress exponentially. Of course, he also predicted that the state wouldn't just, go silently into the night, and that at some point the state would try to clamp down he says something like, launch a last dying breath attempt to smother out the Agorist counter-economic movement. And he said surviving that is what he defined as the revolution, being able to survive and actually defend ourselves against the last little vestiges of the state as it starts to lose power, becomes weaker, would prove that then we are capable of defending ourselves, and thus the state would kind of be a weakened entity. If it still existed at all after that, then it would be like relegated to just one territory or something. It's like, all right, if you want to go under that state and then bring out new ways to organize,
Yeah.
So, he, and like I said, a lot of the things he predicted can't have come true. He died 4 years before Bitcoin. He predicted a lot of digital currencies, and he had a lot of the language. He was seeing the beginning of computers and was also a sci-fi nerd. So he had theories and ideas on what was coming.
Sure.
But yeah, so, a lot of that stuff is becoming even more relevant, because I believe that once we figure out what the immunity passports look like, whether it's a QR code on your phone like some countries are doing, or it's literally a digital certificate, papers please kind of thing you got to carry, there will become a black market for that. People will figure out how to make a fake version of it, make a copy of it. There will be people who will be willing to take bribes for private flights to help people travel because they don't want to go through the airports with the body scanners and the temperature scanners and the face masks and whatever else they're rolling out, right? There's going to be people, like there are in some parts of the world, like Mexico, where I'm headed. Like, it's not a perfect place. Of course, there is no perfect state in the world that is not oppressive in one way or another. But the corruption in many ways is already out front and open. So that when you're dealing with a cop, more than likely they just want a small bribe and they'll leave you alone. So if you need to get across a border or do something that the state says you can't, you're likely to be able to still, grease somebody's palm and get it done. And that to me is like, it's a little bit more explicit, which I kind of prefer, rather than this veil of like,
Sure.
oh, we're like, we're here for your safety, but we're really all corrupt behind the scenes. Like, at least I know these people, that the individual cop or whoever I'm dealing with, he doesn't make that much, and he would probably like to have a little bit extra money. And if I'm like, hey, look, we don't have passports here, or we don't have whatever the deal is, like, here's some money. Those things happen, and that's a part of the counter economy. That is an economic exchange between me and another individual who's deciding in this moment it benefits him, and it's a mutual benefiting situation to take this cash and to turn the other way and look as we pass through. I mean, those kinds of things will still happen as this COVID-19 rolls through. But I do think that the whole point of my book and kind of trying to push agorism is the more prepared we are, the more forward thinking we are, the more ahead of the game we are, the better we're going to be suited as things progress. If we just sit around and wait for it, then all of a sudden, oh no, social credit scores are here, and you don't have any other options. Like I said earlier, we're going to get locked out.
Yeah, I mean, I could very much see there almost being two classes, like a Brave New World-esque, where there's those that got the vaccine and are allowed to participate, and then there are those who have chosen to step back. They're not taking the vaccine, they're not participating, and they have to just figure out how to go it on their own. Or
savages.
Yeah, right. Like you're talking about, I mean, figure out how to organize with the other people that aren't getting the vaccine, that aren't participating in the system, and see if we can, go it on our own and make it work, and hopefully even be, like you're talking about, show other people an example of how happy you can be without participating. They make it seem like, I mean, and they try to make everyone as dependent as they can on this corporate system, but to be free of that and to be able to take care of yourself as a free human being, that's going to make anyone happier. It's just as part of human nature to want to have that kind of freedom and the ability to take care of yourself on that level. I mean, I think that's where maybe some of the spiritual ideas come in, because it is just a happier, healthier, more holistic lifestyle to live sustainably and be able to take care of yourself, rather than be dependent on these powers that be for your food, your medicine, the currency that you're using, how you're trading economically. Giving up your freedom to these people is just not part of human nature. I don't think. I think ultimately people are going to be depressed and unhappy. And you're seeing, I mean, look at what you're seeing in society today, with everybody having to take these depression medications, and these soma drugs, if you will, and continue on working for the system, because it's not a healthy, happy, natural environment for people to be in. So it sounds like a great tactic to me, to just be able to separate from this system at least as much as you can, and participate in this counter economy, make it as healthy as you possibly can. And if the time comes where you can't interact or you don't want to interact any longer with this larger economic system, you don't have to. You have choices. And it's a nonviolent way to just separate yourself out of it all. So, we're not confronting anybody directly, which, like you're talking about, I mean, one of the things, the system obviously has more guns and more money than anybody else is ever going to be able to amass. So thinking about going directly against it is a suicide mission, but figuring out ways around this direct confrontation, I think is they're real valuable tactically in terms of just saying, hey, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to do my own thing.
Exactly. And I want to add to what you just said a moment ago, brother, that I think it's also, we're talking, of course, about the technocracy and everything that's changed because of COVID. And I wrote the book because I want people to be very real about what's going on and to think. I kind of emphasized several times in the book, like, think about this in practical terms, not abstract terms. Think about tomorrow they announce, you can't come to work anymore unless you got the vaccine. Your kids can't come to school. You can't travel. You can't do this. Or, you get a notification that your social credit score is too low because you've been listening to the shift with Doug, and
Right.
just being associated with that is bringing your score down. People are going to make real decisions. Our friends and family are going to call us and tell us that they love us, but they're sorry. They can't associate with us anymore because they need to get this promotion. They need to make sure that they can make that next trip, that they can travel. And I'm sorry, I love you, but unless you're willing to stop, I'm just going to have to stop talking to you because my score keeps going down. These are going to be real things that are already happening in China that we're going to have to, make do with. And so there's definitely a sense of urgency and a reality check there. But also, I think it is important to recognize that, like you said, moving away from these unhealthy systems is just a better way to live. So even if, let's imagine, take away the doom and gloom, crazy government, oppressive government lurching over us all the time scenario, let's imagine there's no zombie apocalypse, no economic collapse, none of these sort of feared things going on. It's just a better way to live. We don't want to be plugged into their systems and plugged into and dependent on them. And like you said, taking their version of medicine and health and history and science and all this stuff. To me, it's even if I'm going, because I'm in the process of acquiring land. I'm starting a permaculture course, actually a 6-month permaculture course tonight, to get certified in permaculture, to teach it to other people, to embrace the solutions that I see and that I think are the key forward. So whether or not, if somehow people wake up and this whole thing is reversed and they're not able to let the technology go in the same direction, because this is the way that I think is going to allow me as an individual to live most in line with my values and principles and most in harmony with the planet. So it's a good thing too. We shouldn't only focus on, or I think it's a good thing to remind ourselves that we shouldn't get stuck on, why we're doing this. Like, we're doing this because we're worried about what's happening. And that's true, but we're also doing this because this is something that's probably better for us. And so whether you are moving to the country, staying in the city, like you were saying, Doug, being able to opt out in whatever ways you have available to you. And in the book, I kind of describe a process of, like, don't be overwhelmed if your goal is that you do want to be off the grid and you want to grow your own food and you want to catch your own water and all these kinds of things, but you're living in the city and you're in debt and you're paying electricity every month, all these kinds of things. Start small, start taking different steps to start making that reality, and you will get there. Even if there is a sense of urgency at the moment, you have to do what you can where you're at instead of being overwhelmed, and recognize that it might be somewhat difficult. It might cost money, time, energy, etc. But in the long run, this is your life, your health, your future that you're talking about. So why not make an effort to accommodate yourself in a way that's going to be most beneficial for your own growth?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you've got to think about it in the long term. I know it's actually kind of a personal problem of mine that I feel like there's so much. I would just want to change everything, and it's not wise to try to think that you can make such drastic changes all at once. But just wake up every day and make a practical decision. This is going to help me to kind of separate me from the system. This is going to make me more independent. This is going to be a healthier choice, and do it day by day. It's just a better way to think about it. And then in a few years, it's amazing what you can accomplish, because it's so easy to get overwhelmed, and it's already so easy. I mean, we already talked about, and I know I've had my battles with depression and things as well. I mean, as you're kind of waking up to this whole social system, this corporate system, this colonizing force, whatever you want to call it, it's easy to get depressed. It's easy to feel anxiety already. And then it's easy to find escapes in drugs or cigarettes or whatever else it is, or too much TV even, and not, every day making these little step forward so that you can start to advance a more holistic life journey that is ultimately going to be healthier. And I know something that you mentioned a lot. I wish more people use this phrase for the seventh generation, because thinking that far forward and thinking about your family that far forward, it makes it easier to take it one day at a time. You don't have to make a radical revolutionary change all at once, right? If you're doing it for the seventh generation, then you got some time, but like, let's try to set our intentions and do the best we can in the moment, and things will get better. So
Yeah, and I also think that, and this is kind of, it's another, for me, a spiritual connecting to the anarchists, is Konkin also talked about in New Libertarian Manifesto and about Agorism that he believed that the lies, and I agree with this, the lies that we're told about both voting and violence is that it's some sort of quick, rapid change, right? All you have to do is go vote, like you did your part, that's it. You can,
right.
don't have to worry about it. Or all we have to do is just go overthrow this one guy and like get rid of Trump and everything will be better. Or get rid of Biden. Those are lies. We know it, and they're sort of sold to you as a quick fix. Whereas agorism is like, yeah, that sounds like a lot of work. I have to change my life. It's going to take time. But he believed, as I do, that you can't really convert people to voluntarism on a mass scale. Like, I don't think there's one film we can show. We could just get everybody in America's attention and they see this 30 seconds, they're all going to be converted. It comes to people in different ways, sometimes through, like me, going through prison. Sometimes people just watch a documentary. Different experiences bring us to this, but it has to be a genuine thing that you find in your heart that you recognize, whoa, violence is wrong. These things are not right. And so Konkin did believe that the best thing we could do is to be an example. You put one improved person forward who's working on living in line with these values, and you lead by example, and that inspires other people. At the same time, we're pulling out of these systems, and so over time we're taking away their power. Now again, like, that doesn't mean tomorrow things are better. It's going to take some time, and I take this action, and I think any action that we take to empower people, with the understanding that I might not see, and likely will not see, the full fruits or results of my labor in my lifetime. And that if I have children or grandchildren and those sort of things, that perhaps in their lifetime, and that's really what I fight for, right? And at the same time, the whole principle of seventh generation, you mentioned, indigenous teachings, and of course I agree with you that there's definitely still a colonizing force in the United States and around the world. And I am native on both sides of my family, but I didn't grow up on a reservation. I haven't been taught those ways. I kind of found them on my own by going to Sweat Lodge and then ending up in Standing Rock and getting to meet different tribes, particularly learning from the Lakota. And then the last few years going to the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma for Sundance and for medicine and for our rituals, and getting to know that and connect on that level. So it's been really important to me, and that's where the seventh generation idea comes from the Iroquois. They're definitely one who are well known for mentioning it, but it's now become pretty much known, and I'd say most indigenous cultures have some version of that idea that we need to think not only about what we're doing here, what's right in front of us, but how are we impacting the generations after us, the ones we won't see up to 7 generations and beyond. And when you really do incorporate that principle into your way of living, I do think it can create, just that alone, radical change in the way that you do purchases you make, the decisions you make, what types of governments you want to support or politicians, and you really can incorporate that along with respecting other people's self-ownership. I feel like those two are just two key principles, understanding seventh generation and looking at life in that term, and understanding voluntarism, self-ownership. You own yourself. It's wrong for me to initiate violence against you. Like, those two core principles can, I think, radically shift most people if they start living them on a daily basis. And then once you do that, it seems to me at least sort of natural to start recognizing that whether you call yourself an agorist or anarchist or counter-economist, whatever, that you start to recognize that these systems do not align with your values. And so it only makes sense that you want to pull out from them, pull away from them, and support better things. That's why I think agorism is so interesting, because even if people don't understand or never heard of Samuel Konkin, a lot of people are already instinctively doing these things. They're already trying to
Absolutely.
get away from these things, So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think it's interesting how, again, the spiritual seventh generation and taking things generationally aligns with the agorist solution, that it's going to be a generational change, an individual change.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to try to tie this in, because one of the things I know, and I totally agree with you on this too, is just this: I'm so frustrated with the left-right paradigm, and everybody's always arguing. Like, you can clearly see that this is a setup so that everybody's fighting each other all the time, and nobody's going to get united against this common oppressive force, really. And then I've thought a lot about, because I've studied a lot of the political philosophy behind it all and everything. But of course, the left-right paradigm is really like this disagreement historically between these two guys, right, Hegel and Marx, and what they call the end of history. They have this whole idea of this materialist dialectic, or this historical dialectic, where the two forces are always going back and forth. And then there's, the thesis, the antithesis. They fight each other, and then they resynthesize into the new way. But it's this, the whole historiosity of it, or the whole concept behind it, is that these radical revolutionary changes are what make change. And so it's interesting to kind of do a little comparison and contrast and say, wait a minute, what about this idea of the seventh generation and how different that is from, like, there's these two forces in history, they're fighting each other, and then they resynthesize after this incredible revolutionary moment or whatever, instead of replacing that with this, like, no, actual healthy change happens in this long, slow, methodical kind of way. It's not this radical revolutionary, all of a sudden in an instant everything's different. I mean, just changing your mindset into
I like
thinking like
that.
that, like, that's a major shift, right?
Yeah.
In psychology,
Yeah,
it's important.
I was just actually reading, probably yesterday, the day before, about kind of revisiting the end of history concept, and so it's interesting you bring that
Right.
up. But yeah, I love that, because so many people, whether there's a lot of right wingers and conservatives and just libertarians and people who are concerned about the influence still of Marx and Marxism and things of that sort, but at the
Sure.
same time don't realize how in many cases we're still arguing from within, like, foundations that they've laid, right? It's like either this version of the dialectic or this version of that.
Yeah.
You're still kind of within the confines of their philosophy,
Right.
instead of getting out of that. I mean, obviously Marx was influential, but I just think that's interesting. People don't really understand how they're still being influenced by something that they oppose, just by even expecting a version of history like that, something that comes from these great revolutionary moments, and then we're going to achieve the end of history, or some new beginning, some new
Totally.
paradigm,
Yeah.
rather than us changing individually as individuals, and then collectively that leads to change.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
good stuff, man.
you bring it up, right? The idea of the end of history. I think this is exactly what these technocrats sort of delusionally imagine themselves as doing. We're transcending the natural order of things, the natural progression of history. And now we can scientifically create this, this post-history culture that is just created out of pure science and pure technocracy. As long as we can control everything, then it's this utopian thinking, right? That they can create some perfect world if only they could just control everybody, and those pesky ignorant people would stop fighting them.
Social engineering at its finest. I mean, that's what these people are, social engineers.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I think going back to the Marxism, I mean, one of the things that I distrust about Marxism was his whole idea about replacing naturally grown culture with this sort of post-communist culture. And it's, I don't know, to me, if you really believe in diversity, then you believe in allowing cultures to grow as a natural, almost organically. And this whole concept of controlling culture and social engineering, I mean, you're just going straight into this Dr. Frankenstein world. It's not going to end well. There's just no way. And
I mean, I'm really never. I mean, Marx is like a historical figure is interesting to me because clearly, like I said, he's influenced so much of our world.
mhm,
But like, as far as the actual content of his work, I've never been that impressed, and I can't claim to have read everything that Marx or Engels ever wrote. But the thing is, at the end of the day, I can clearly see that he's just another authoritarian who is imagining how he would centrally plan society. And like, sure, he's claiming that it's going to lead to the best outcome ever in this utopia, whatever. But isn't that what every single tyrant who thinks that they can, make decisions for everybody thinks that they're the best out there and they got this thing figured out? And then they have unfortunately really co-opted. Because these debates go, between Marx, and it goes all the way back to the anarchists from the mid 1800s that were the anarchists, both anarcho-communists who were against Marx and saw him as a statist kind of authoritarian, and then even the individualist anarchists who were very active in America in the mid 1800s, Benjamin Tucker, Lysander Spooner. These were the men of his time as well. And we're only kind of told about the influence of Marx, but even back then there were anarchists who were saying like, this guy is like, he just wants power, and whether or not he wants it, his ideas are inspiring more people to believe that. And they've sort of since that time have been able to co-opt the working class, as it were, where I think that the working class, if there was more of an individualist, not even anarchist movement, but just individualist in general, where people stop seeing themselves as these collectives that move and live together and the collective good is more important than the individual, then I think there could be a lot more unity in that front. But instead they have the Marxist idea has led to, identity politics and different things like that just break down people into smaller and smaller groups. And not to say that there aren't interesting things. Like I personally I find a lot of interesting and even important insights from looking at the intersection of race or class or some of these different things that, again, were influenced by Marx's thoughts. But I don't think that they should be the be all end all, the way we judge individuals, just on these various identities. And so it gets into really problematic areas, and I've just never really been that impressed. But the one thing I do know that Samuel Konkin, with Agorism, he actually was writing, he had one essay that was unfinished, and then another kind of agorist named Wally Conger, he came along and kind of updated it. And it's really interesting because Konkin actually takes on the idea that Marx put forward of class. He believed in that class is what separates people and that there's a struggle between the classes, and that's what is going to inevitably lead to some sort of revolution. The capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, and the proletariat, all these kinds of concepts.
Right.
Well, Konkin says that Marx made a big mistake, and most Marxists, by ignoring the entrepreneur, that they just sort of lump in the capitalist. And Konkin's view, which I think is a more accurate historical view, markets do not necessarily equal capitalism. That the historical use of capitalism, as it has been known, was using state privilege, was people, that sort of elitist class using their capital to work with the state, and what we would consider statism. So I'm not really a person who's in has an interest in saving the word capitalism, but I know people use it meaning a different thing. But I think the market is a more accurate term for that. And so Konkin is basically saying like they break people down into either you're working class, or you're part of the bourgeoisie, you're part of the elite class, and there's no sort of room for the individual who's just an entrepreneur, right? They just see everybody as a collective. So we're all workers, we all come together. So workers' interest, so that we have to have somebody centrally planning to make sure everything's equal, right? But what about the individual entrepreneur who's just some, has a business in front of their house, or, goes around and sells fruit or whatever it may be? There's no room for that person in their system. And so that's where Konkin says, like, that's just a huge gap in Marxist way of thinking, because calling every single person out there who's trying to make a dollar survive part of the capitalist class, and treating them the same you would like the Rockefellers or the Bill Gates is just silly, And so, so he really calls attention to that as well as other flaws in their thinking.
Well, this is such an important point. I mean, I can't, I've spent time on Facebook anarchy groups and getting into it with it because I wanted to have an open mind, especially since I came from a libertarian perspective. I wanted to have an open mind to the more left-wing perspectives. And ultimately, I found out that it's like everyone's using the term capitalism differently. Like whatever you think, you can't have an argument if you haven't defined your terms. So if everybody's having an argument, but this term capitalism means something different for everybody, then you're not having, it's never going to be a reasonable conversation. It's like gibberish. It's just a waste of time. And I've seen so so much time wasted over this one term capitalism for exactly the reason that you're saying. I mean, some people equate capitalism with this corporate system, which I think you and and I mean, I would imagine any thinking person is going to have a problem with, imposing dependencies on people, obviously taking advantage of labor, monopolizing markets, using government force. I mean, it's just an extension of statism as this corporate system. I mean, it's corporate fascism, right? We have a term for it. It's called fascism. It's not good. Nobody wants this, right? Except for these elite people that are profiting immensely off of it. But any thinking, caring person is not going to desire this. And then just ignoring the fact that there is this whole entrepreneur class of people who are just running a restaurant, or wanting to have a backyard garden where maybe they could sell some tomatoes for a little extra money, or whatever it is, or being able to make herbal medicines and sell it for a little extra cash, on that gray market. Because that's what you got to do. I mean, these people aren't bad people. They're not evil capitalists. And then I also think, too, one of the more interesting things that I've noticed, and I keep trying to get this across, this left-right paradigm gets in people's, I mean, they just can't see beyond it. It's frustrating, is that the quote-unquote capitalist class seems to be funding these communist revolutions. I mean, I've seen it over and over again. Like, if capitalism, I mean, to my mind, and I think it's the same with technocracy. Technocracy is just another form of utopia, just like they used communism 150 years ago as it's going to be this perfect scientific system. Now it's the scientists, and they've got everybody to buy in that the scientists are like this priest class, and it's going to be a utopia if only we allow these people to have total authority over us. But the wealthy people are funding all of this because it actually, I mean, to me, communism is a way of kind of tricking the proletariat class into accepting the centralization of the means of production. And so, of course, these really, really rich people they're trying to centralize the means of production. How are they going to do it? Well, they're going to tell you it's a utopia. Just let them do
It's
it.
a dictatorship of the proletariat.
Right.
It's a dictatorship of the people.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, we see the cycle.
Well, I want to just add to that, man, that you're totally right what you said earlier about and it's something that I've really tried to emphasize, like in all of my books. Whenever I realize that I'm using a term quite often, and I'm like, okay, well, let me make sure I've actually defined this somewhere in the beginning of the conversation so that people know what I'm speaking on. Because like you said, we can have the conversation, and social media is great for this, talking past each other because you're speaking from different definitions.
Yeah.
But that's where I've seen, I mean, one of the biggest divides between different types of anarchists is I guess the couple that I see is the use of violence, whether that's legitimate or not.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, whether you support property, obviously that's a huge argument. And that again is like, well, what do you mean by personal property? What do you mean by private property? Let's actually make sure we don't mean the same thing in different words,
Totally.
And then of course, like whether or not you support capitalism, but of course, what definition are you using to define that? And there's a lot of debates that go into that. But these divides have persisted for 200 years now, and you're right. The people that benefit are the whatever we want to call them. I call them the predator class. You can call them capitalist class, whatever. Or they're the technocrats these days. That's what they're doing now. And they'll sell it to people as communism, socialism. They'll sell it to them as capitalism. But at the end, it's them in control. It's them central planning. And I think you're right that they sell it to the working class. That's kind of what I was saying earlier, is I think that the working class has been co-opted for 150 to 200 years now by these people. And, you don't really see much libertarian working class organizing, like libertarians don't get involved in trying to, whatever people's feelings on unions. The point is that libertarians aren't on the job, like out there. Even if you were like anti-union, they're not out there talking to people and saying why this is a better philosophy, ideology, etc. And so I think there's a lot of gaps in these areas because people seem to stick to their own dogmas. That's why, I mean, for me personally, around 2016, I made a conscious decision to stop spending so much energy with the libertarians. I still consider myself of that same philosophy, probably even more refined than I was when I was active with at those events and with those people. But I just started to see the same debates over and over and over, and the same like philosophical circle jerking after a while. Like, I love, like, I'm deep in anarchist history and philosophy. I mean, I just got this one that I'm excited about. This is Individualist Feminism of the 19th Century, talking about like the anarcho-feminists that were actually individualists that didn't believe in this collective, all men are bad or anything like that. There's good stuff here, but just another example, I see a lot of libertarians, anarcho-capitalists completely dismiss feminism because of what they see in the world today. And there's a lot of lack of knowledge, I think, of historical understanding. And, it's important, at least for me, to have that context. So if you're trying to build bridges, you can actually do it if you actually know what the other people are reading and saying and talking about, as opposed to just dismissing it because it's the other side,
Well, that's just exactly what you're saying, building bridges. I mean, I feel like first things first, if we're going to win this, whatever this fight is, if we're going to stop the predator class, like you're talking about, we have to build bridges between the left and the right. It's just something I've felt this way for a long time. And the point that you're making about how the libertarians on the right, or the anarcho-capitalists, if you will, they're like nerds. They sit around and they argue amongst themselves. On the activism side, that's where you see the people who are more progressive leaning or left-wing thinkers or whatever. And we have to have this balance between these two. Like the bridge is right there, right? You've got to have the thinkers, because I do agree. I think the sort of the quote unquote right-wing thinkers are thinking really well. But these people on the left that are doing the activism part, I mean, you've got to have the activism as well. We've got to find, again, that middle path between the left and the right, or whatever. I mean, let's try to transcend this left-right paradigm where people want to fight each other. It's not about fighting each other. It's got to be about figuring out how to work together, because you need the people who are activists and you need the people who are thinkers. And if they were working together and they had some kind of cohesive philosophy to work together and actually getting something done on the ground, like, I mean, we can go into talking about your freedom cells idea, but trying to figure out how to actually organize. Because I've done some political work here in Northern California, but it's very much like what you're talking about. The people that I was working with were all progressives, and I had to learn how to adjust my perception to be able to have respect for their point of view, and then try to inject occasionally, well, this is why I believe in individualism, or the importance of setting boundaries against what the quote unquote collective or the government can do to us. But also kind of figure out, well, how do I adjust my thinking so that I can work with these people without, without getting into conflict. It's kind of a challenge, but it's a worthy challenge.
Yeah, and I agree with you there, man. I mean, I think that there's a lot of, for all the beautiful things of social media and internet, I've realized that a lot of people live through the internet and haven't so much, there's obviously social media activism can play a great role, and it has over the last decade or more. But there's a lot of folks who I think sort of grew up with their activism on the internet and haven't put much time on the ground, out there talking to people, engaging with people, and especially not, as you just mentioned, engaging with people that you don't necessarily agree with, but because whatever the cause is important enough to you, you're not just going to immediately leave the second somebody expresses an opinion you don't like or that you disagree with. You hear their side, and like you said, when there's a respectful, open opportunity to, well, here's the way I feel about that. Have you ever thought about this? And that's how people learn. That's how we grow. But there's not enough of that, that I've seen. And I've seen the Houston activism scene, if you will, for the last 10 years become more and more divisive than ever. And I think it's probably similar in most major cities where there's no longer coalitions. Like when we first started the Houston Freethinkers in 2010, about a year later, the Occupy movement launched. And so there was Occupy Houston, Houston Freethinkers. And some of the biggest marches we did were collaborative marches where we had our Houston Freethinkers out there camping with them. Some of us were camped out at the park that they were at. And we would screen movies. Sometimes we would get on like Freedom to Fascism or a Federal Reserve documentary. Right. And some of the socialist leftists would be like, oh, this is garbage. But we would still play it, and they would play their things. And, some people accused us of trying to take things over. But generally, people understood we were just another group that also gave a damn about what the banks were up to and wanted to collaborate. And some of the biggest actions, we did a collaborative march that made the news all around the city. We had hundreds of people, and it was led by the Houston Freethinkers, which we were definitely more independent, libertarian, even though we never identified that way. You could kind of see where we were at. Yeah. And the Occupy movement, and we both came together to march on the representatives in the federal building, their offices, when the NDAA was passed, whenever Obama passed the indefinite detention of American citizens. We did another big collaborative march when it was like one of the internet pills, I think SOPA, when they were trying to pass that back in that time period. And so we were coming together on that. There's been so many big police brutality marches where there's the, what do they call themselves? They're Bobavakian revolutionary communists or something like that. We had them, you had the Houston Freethinkers, you had the Peaceful Streets Project, you had, Cop Block, and a mix of cop accountability activists that would come together for these types of events. But now where we're at, it's like if you show up at an event like that and you're not 100% ideologically aligned with whoever the organizer is, you're likely to get shouted down or just made clear you're not welcome or these sorts of things. And there's no real effort to build bridges anymore that I've seen. And I think it's one of the worst things that things have gotten more divisive, because the answer is to build those bridges. Because, I mean, without a doubt, who is sitting back laughing while we're all fighting in the streets or yelling at each other on the internet and making memes about each other? The people up there are absolutely sitting back and just enjoying the heck out of it. I mean, it couldn't be more clear that the more divisive that we are against each other, the less time we're spending. And not to say that there's not time for these philosophical debates and discussion, but at the same time, we got to be like, okay, these things have been happening for 200 years. We've been arguing about the same things for 200 years. Maybe some of us just can't work together. Maybe some of you need to figure out how to communicate better. I mean, there's a lot of that going around. But why not focus on solutions? And I've always been very solutions based, which is why, to me, like, Konkin's got a couple of books that are written, but they're not very long, because Agorism is basically just like opt out, get out of their system. He's got some philosophy behind it for those who want to go deep, but that's really what it comes down to. Get your money out of their bank, get your money out of their system, take away your financial support from that system. Like, it's just, that's what it is, And so there's not a whole lot of need for, just philosophizing about everything. It's just an action oriented, even with what he wrote, he called it A3, anarchy, agora, and action. And, it's very action oriented. And the first public speech I ever gave was in 2013. And I proposed adding a fourth A to that, which was bringing in the spiritual component. And it was for awareness or mindfulness. So we had the 4 A's: anarchy, agora, action, and awareness. So, I think that's just where I'm trying to spend my time with my activism. My journalism is action oriented. I'm done with just debating people. I'm done with just, I've got my books and I put it out there. Here's my beliefs on the philosophy and the questions about these various, theoretical ideas that we may or may never ever have to deal with. That's out there if people want to read that. But now, to me, is like, we got to build. We got to connect with people who are like-minded, no matter whatever they identify with. If we can find an issue to agree with and work together, then let's do that. If we can't, then have a nice life. I'm going to focus on who I can build with,
Well, why don't we, with the last couple of minutes we have here, why don't you explain the whole freedom cell concept to people, and we can maybe try to get people to go to the website and check it out. I know, I guess you just had a phone meeting the other day, Saturday, huh? I've actually participated in one of these just to learn more about it. It was about a month ago, I guess now, but it's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, so the website is freedomcells.org. That's CELLS.org, like the cells in your body. And Freedom Cells is the website, first of all, is meant to be somewhat of a social network, but not a place where you're posting pictures of your cat or your food or things like that. But a place where you can go on, create a profile. What are your skills? What are your goals? What are your interests? You can search and find other people with similar skills and interests. The main component is the map that we have. We actually have 2 maps. One is the individual map, where you can go on and say you're in California. You can search your city and find people within 10, 20, 50, 100 miles of you and connect with them in person, with the goal of actually meeting in the real world. You can also use the second map, which is the cell map or the group map, and find people who have already formed cells or groups. And so essentially what we mean by a freedom cell, it's a peer-to-peer decentralized group of 7 to 9 people. The ideal number is 8, and there's some research behind that number, that are organizing themselves in a completely decentralized manner to improve the individual's lives as well as to improve the collective 8 people there by sharing skills, sharing ideas, again, learning self-defense skills, being that core group that you can kind of lean on and depend on. And the goal is that we're, creating these, say, North Houston, and then we start encouraging people, hey, if you guys have a group down there on the other side of Houston, or, a town away, form your own group there. And then you have those inner groups But then at the same time, we can start forming kind of larger regional groups, like say another group of 8 people that live in another part of town. And then whenever we have bigger tasks, maybe for example, we schedule a permaculture action day and all the different freedom cells around Houston go out and plant some trees or build some gardens. We do bigger tasks working together, or we all decide, hey, let's come together and build this home for one of our neighbors who lost it in the recent hurricane or something like that. So you're building individual autonomy within the group, sharing skills, sharing ideas. The idea being that, like you were just saying, there's no centralization. There's no one leader who is kind of running things, that the power is diffused and the knowledge is diffused. So for example, if you wanted to make sure that everybody in the group could, do CPR in case of emergency, well, you take a class together. That way, that, okay, all 8 of us here can take care of somebody if they're choking or whatever. There's not like, hey, where's so-and-so, the one person who knows how to do it, you all decide you want to learn more about permaculture, so you sign up for a permaculture course together, or you start watching permaculture documentaries together, and you share different ideas and research and study together. Maybe you guys decide you want to learn about aquaponics, so you break that topic up between your group. You two take what we're going to need, what materials. You two take what building, all these different things, whatever it may be, and then you come back and share that knowledge with each other. And the goal is that as we're building these decentralized circles, these cells, I've had people call them hubs, hives, whatever. I mean, the name really doesn't matter. We just have called them freedom cells now for about 5 years or so. And you're building these pockets of cells that are also hopefully pulling away from the system. Maybe everybody's getting into alternative currency, cryptocurrency, or bartering together. So it kind of works into the agorist idea, even though it's not necessarily explicitly an agorist thing. It helps people break away and have that support system. And so as we're creating these pockets, we start to create bigger groups that then can network together on the citywide level, on the statewide level, national, and eventually international. I mean, the concept has really exploded since COVID-19 began. We now have 3,500 members who have joined from all around the world. You can see the map. It's actually pretty cool and impressive to see, just, after years and years of talking about this, seeing people really start to embrace it, seeing the number of cells growing. And yeah, we're doing these monthly international conference calls that have people from all around the world tuning in. We had one just yesterday. We had about 80 people for 2 hours or so. I shared a little bit. John Bush, who's another activist who's on my website, who's actually the original guy who kind of got the idea in my head, he talked a little bit. And then we had some people from Oklahoma, Atlanta, and Texas share about what their cells are doing, what they've been up to, how they've been very successful, what's worked for them and what hasn't. So it truly is a decentralized, like, peer-to-peer network that's helping bring people together. And my goal is that the map could be used for traveling. When you're traveling, you can find like minds who can hopefully plug you into where the farmers markets are, where the community's at, where the other activists are, where just other good people are that you can trust. And also helping people find each other, because the goal is using the website to find each other, to have real world meetings, to start meeting in person and actually organizing and creating this parallel network that for some people will lead to buying land and living together. Maybe for some people, it'll just be a support system they use in their town or city. And for some people, it might just be a new set of friends that they can at least talk with. People are using it in a different way, because that's the beauty of decentralization. I've put out some essays and some ideas. We've got a whole playlist on how it can be applied in different situations. But ultimately, it will be whatever people make it be, because that's what decentralization is about. If people choose to take on it and really create a parallel network that can replace the current government, and we create a new, beautiful society, then it'll do that. But if people are timid or afraid or slow to move, or just doubtful, then maybe it'll just be a cool concept on paper. But so far we've seen it really, really growing at a rapid pace. So I'm excited. And again, the website is freedomcells.org. Really recommend everybody just check it out and get on there. And if you're feeling lonely and thinking you're alone, there might be a chance that there's somebody on the website that you can at least connect with, and that might at the very least be a new friend that you can talk about what's going on in the world.
I think that's actually an important point. I even just myself getting on there and seeing that, man, there's a couple of people here in Mendocino County who are also members. It was like, okay, great. There, I do have some more like-minded people than I even knew about, just kind of here close by that I can get in touch with. But I think the other great thing about this is even I could see it, because I really do think that if we want to think ahead, and we want to prepare for what may be happening. I mean, this is a pretty big push for the technocracy right now. And in terms of these COVID passports, and the contact tracing that's going on, and a lot of this stuff, it may very well be coming to a position where we're all going to have to make a choice whether we want to participate or whether we don't want to participate. And if we don't, then real economic distribution is going to be a thing. We're going to need to get supplies, food and medicines, and just having a communications network like this that's there and available. And there's a cell that's on the coast, we could trade seaweed or we could trade fish for what we're growing inland, and just kind of having that communication just to kind of develop this underground economy. That really might be something that we're going to have to make that choice. If we don't want to get the vaccine, it's, I'm starting to think like, I'm definitely putting in a big garden, right? And then it's going to be really important to trade with your friends. If your friends have the ability to make alcohol, or they can make medicines, or you can grow the herbs and they can make the alcohol, things like this. These are the kind of ways that we're going to need to be thinking. And it's almost be a good thing if it does come to that, because I think that people, if you have to make a choice to just end your dependency on the current system, then get involved with something like this freedom cells idea and see how far you can take it, and just how much you can be, your own individual that doesn't have, not dependent on this larger system for your needs, for your energy needs, for your food source, for your medicines. So I hope people really take it seriously, and I'll definitely throw that website up in the show notes and on the introduction so that people will be able to find it. It's a great resource. And then I guess, again, before we leave, maybe you could talk a little bit about your plans for what's happening in Mexico. I'd also like you to bring up the Bill Gates Day. I assumed that we were going to talk about Bill Gates quite a bit, but we never really did. We touched on the whole technocratic thing, so we talked around it. But go ahead and plug that while I have you here. And then maybe a little quick discussion about this Underground Railroad idea, just in case it does become difficult for people to travel.
Yeah, so some of those ideas are, it's all sort of interrelated. The first thing I will say is that you were kind of touching on is that the COVID is a catalyst, one way or the other. It's a catalyst. If you do not like the life you were leading before COVID-19, before the quote unquote new normal, this is your opportunity to change it. And you're either going to be complacent and you're going to change it for your own, reasons and the ways you want to go, or you're going to be swept up in their great reset, their new normal, and the change will come that way. So use this as a catalyst to move forward into, if you've known the problems for a long time but haven't really stepped up to take some solutions on, this is the time, and you might not have so many other opportunities. So absolutely do that. And as far as Mexico, it is basically counter-economic underground railroad that I also wrote about in How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. And basically, it kind of fits in with freedom cells, so it's a good thing to end with. Like, freedom cells, we're building this network of people and individuals and groups, right? And people hopefully will start being able to trade together and coordinate together and come to each other's aid whenever things get dicey. That's another big part of it. But I also do believe that because the United States is kind of the central point of this right now, we know that these people would like the United States to succumb to tyranny, and that the idea of individual liberty that has been strong in the United States to disappear completely. So I know that they're focused hard on the United States. I don't know if the United States is salvageable, but what I do know is that I have family and friends and people who I love and care about who are not quite on board or on the same page of this yet, but I know that they will in time. I know that they will see these things in time, and it might be a little too late for them then, as far as being able to just cross across the border without any kind of trouble. And I made a post about this on social media yesterday. There's already refugees from the United States and from other Western nations that people just haven't quite caught on to yet. I'm sure the state's realizing it. I'm sure the state is recognizing that many people are starting to head south or head north or head, across the ocean and looking for greener pastures. And it's not just happening in the United States. It's happening in Australia, lots of other Western nations, and other parts of the world, India included, that are seeing the technocracy and the tyranny coming. And so for me, I'm going south towards Mexico. I have some friends and family throughout there, and I was born in Houston, but the last 4 years I've got to know Mexico and really love the culture, love the land. And I think that for the moment, it does offer some measures of freedom and liberty that are increasingly less available in the United States, I'll say. And of course, that doesn't mean the Mexican government or any of the situation there is perfect, but that's the direction that I've been moving in, is going down there, So I was there for 2.5 months earlier in the year, scouting, looking for land, kind of have our own little freedom cell there. And I'll be headed back in the next 2 weeks to continue that search. We've got a few good properties that we're checking out, and the goal is to just look for get this land. And as I mentioned, I'm taking this permaculture course, and to just start getting organized and really planting some food in the ground, building a community and a network of communities. So part of it is trying to establish a safe space so that if and when my family, friends, and other people who reach out, because I've had 300 or so people reach out from all around the world who are terrified of what's going on, and when people look to, I need somewhere to go, I believe that we again, and being forward thinking, we would be better off if we start planning ahead, and there is a somewhere to be. It's not just like head for the hills, run away. Where are you going to go? I mean, some people will choose to stay, and that's fine. I will probably be back to the United States to protect and defend what I love if it comes to that. But in the meantime, I would like to have something to build on. Like I said earlier, it doesn't have to be necessarily a doom and gloom situation. It can just be a choice that we're trying to live better, that there's another better way to live. And for me, I don't feel like I'll be able to do what I want to do by purchasing land in the United States, the direction things are going. Like, I feel like I'll have much more freedom sort of disappearing into the countryside of Mexico and being able to build and not have to pay all kinds of permits to do things on my own land and all kinds of restrictions. And I don't see this as abandoning the United States. Like I mentioned, if things get hairy or if people I love don't want to leave, I will come back to help however I can, especially if things do break out into some sort of physical altercation, which we all hope and pray it won't, but seems more inevitable. But in the meantime, I want to make sure there's a somewhere for people to get to. I would like to help build a patchwork, a network of communities and safe houses and places that people can get to. Whenever I was in Morelia, in Mexico, most recently, we rented a big apartment with a big house with extra rooms that I didn't need, just so that other people who were coming could have a place to put their head down when they got there. Mm-hmm. And we were able to help a young mother and her daughter, another anarchist friend from Chicago who happened to be coming that way or were looking to get out, and they stayed with us for a couple months while they figured things out. I think these things are going to be important and necessary as people are coming, especially if they come to Mexico or wherever they go. They're coming to new countries that they don't know much about, where they might not speak the language. I mean, this is the nature of being a refugee, of running away from something to try to find temporary, refuge. So I think that's where things are heading, and I've just sort of chosen, I guess, to take on that role of trying to kickstart something like that, and people are responding really well. And so the Mexico project is basically that, like laying down the foundation for the Underground Railroad, as well as trying to get land for my own home that me and my partner are trying to build, as well as hopefully having enough property and adjacent land where we can build a network of communities and everybody can be, if not living on the same piece of property, right near each other and next to each other, to start building that, as well as, of course, networking with the Mexican people out there, who many of them see through this COVID and think it's bullshit, especially when you go up into the smaller towns where they're just like living in a totally different world. They're not plugged into all this. But yeah, so that's kind of, and then as far as Bill Gates and all that, I mean, we did expose Bill Gates days. We did 2 of them, one in June, and we just recently had another one. And we're now calling for every second Saturday of every month. If you're interested, you want to get active, whether online or in the real world, I've got the web page set up. It's just theconsciousresistance.com/Bill Gates. It explains everything there. It's got links to flyers and to more info that you can print out and kind of make your own. And I'm still getting people emailing me about it. So I think it is a growing concept. Of course, Bill Gates more, it's about what he represents, which is the technocratic class, the technocracy, and what they're trying to erect using COVID. And the reason I focused on him, and James Corbett and others have, is because clearly, since this whole thing began, he's become the spokesperson for this agenda, all over TV and all over that. So it seems like it's a crucial moment to attack the caricature version of himself that he's presenting to the kind of mainstream population, and to help them see who he really is, who he really represents, and what their agenda is, which is complete control. And there's definitely a eugenics element to it, and the first Expose Bill Gates Day did go viral, and it was trending on Twitter and elsewhere. We got a few articles written about us. The second one, it seemed like there was clearly a block on the hashtag, which is to be expected, right? But the whole thing is, don't just rely on social media. Print out some flyers, talk to people. I've been hosting documentaries at that. Pretty much this is my life, dedicating it to trying to wake people up to the technocracy, trying to focus on the solutions so that I don't drive myself crazy. Because if I was just sitting here watching this happen and doing nothing, I would feel a little bit nuts. I would be panicked right now. But since I know I'm doing everything I can to try to encourage people to look at the solutions, to learn how to grow their own food, to unplug from these systems, to work on their own trauma, and I'm actively doing those things, I feel like I'm giving it everything I can. And the more of us who do that, then the better off we're going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I for one, really appreciate your work. I'm glad you're out there doing it. It's been great, and I'm actually with you in terms of thinking about getting the hell out of the United States. It just seems like the technocratic hold here is so powerful. It's kind of like this whole concept of agorism and the counter economy, and just to be able to go to some place where the powers that be aren't so dominant. I mean, I do live out in the country, and just being in the country, even in the United States, is easier than living in a city. But I can see going to a place like Mexico or even South America, where it's just more based on individual relationships, one-on-one. Even if you have to grease some palms of the local, constable or whatnot, at least you're participating in this one-on-one relationship. You're getting things done. You're able to be an individual in the world without having to fear getting sucked into this whole technocratic system that seems like is coming faster and faster every day. So thanks for what you're doing. Should we point people to the consciousresistance.com to find out more about your work? Maybe I would also recommend going to thelastamericanvagabond.com, where you have a page that's got a lot of your written work, your journalism.
Yeah, all my articles are at The Last American Vagabond, and pretty much everything else I publish, my videos are all at The Conscious Resistance. And yeah, man, I appreciate the conversation, and thanks for all that you do.
Yep, for sure. Absolutely, Derrick. Thanks for coming on, and keep on keeping on. We'll keep pointing people in your direction, and I hope my listeners will get turned on to some of your stuff and maybe think about participating in this Freedom Cell network as well. So thanks again, and have a great day. Hope we keep in touch.
Thank you, brother.
Yep, you bet. Take care. Well, all right, everybody, and there you have it. That was the 50th episode of The Shift with activist and citizen journalist Derrick Broze. I was really excited to talk to this guy. I've been following him for a number of years. I think I feel a little bit of a close connection with him just because we're both from the Houston area. I grew up just outside of Houston, so it's always nice to see one of my hometown boys actually doing some really, really good work out there, and just kind of watching Derrick develop and grow as a journalist over the last it's probably been at least 4 or 5 years since I've been following him, has been a real pleasure. One of the things, like I brought up in the introduction, is this combination of psychological and spiritual healing that he really infuses his political philosophy and his journalistic work with, is something that I really appreciate. I don't think people do this enough. A part of making the shift is certainly, I think actually, frankly, healing from the trauma that all of us and our families, the generational trauma that our families have felt over the hundreds of years of being part of this great Roman Empire experiment. At one point we were all indigenous. I think Derrick and I even had a little bit of a discussion about this. He mentions that he's been doing some sweat lodges and participating maybe a little bit in the sun dance as well. And so I guess I was really happy to hear that, actually, that he's got this experience with Native American ceremony. Because I think that we all have so much to learn from those guys. So to hear that Derrick has taken it to that level and is learning from the indigenous people, because all of us come from indigenous roots, right? And then at some point or another, one empire or another came in, took us out, pulled us from our spiritual ceremonies, and incorporated us into this larger colonized system of empire. And I think learning about and going back to those indigenous roots actually is going to be a really important part of making this process that, as you all are starting to understand, I'm calling the shift. But whatever you want to call it, it's a healing from the trauma of being pulled away from the Mother Earth in this way and being colonized into this empire consciousness, as I describe it a bit. So brought out some of those really good ideas in talking to Derrick, and he just does so much other good work. I was really happy to see For those of you, I think episode 39 of The Shift is with Ryan Christian of The Last American Vagabond. And just within the last year, I think Derrick and Whitney Webb both got picked up by Ryan over there at thelastamericanvagabond.com. And so Derrick's journalistic work is posted up there. It's great. I love to see all three of those guys working together. Actually, I love their work, especially breaking free from the left-right paradigm, really working to try to unify people against this broader corporate government system that is just taking so much of the resources from the land and not giving back to the working class that's actually doing the production. And so especially since this collapse of the economy that started in March, we've seen so much money going upwards into the billionaire class, and so much money that is not getting produced by the lower classes. I'm afraid that as things progress, we're going to see so much dependency on the government, corporate, these private-public partnerships coming together to help us, because as they like to say, never let a good crisis go to waste. They'll be using this crisis to make us ever more dependent, which then gets us to the whole concept of opting out, and Derrick's new book, Opting Out of How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, and this concept of agorism, which, you know, as those of you who've listened to this show, I often will interview anarchists of different stripes. Have another one actually coming up next week, so we'll dive a little bit deeper into anarchy there too. But this concept of agorism is something that I hadn't really delved into too much, and so I was really happy to get into it with Derrick. Just about the idea of being able to set up our own separate marketplace distinct from this predator class distribution system. Again, as Derrick describes the upper class as the predator class, kind of feeding off of all of us, taking way more than their fair share of the resources by controlling the marketplace. And Derrick's idea, which I totally agree with, is, hey, like, let's just separate ourselves from this system. Let's just do our own thing. And so I urge all of you to go to freedomcells.org. I'll post it in the show notes so that you can go check it out. The network is a really interesting concept, and I think it could become highly functional, especially as things progress. If you've seen some of my other interviews recently, some of the roundtable discussions that I've been doing at Transparent Media Truth, we've been talking a lot about this potential separation that may be occurring where, you know, if you don't take the vaccine, if you don't take this coronavirus vaccine, then you're not going to be allowed into your bank account. You're not going to be allowed to shop at these stores. You're not going to be allowed to travel. Derrick's been talking about setting up a kind of an underground railroad where he can help people get out of the country if you want to leave the United States, if you want to find a safer place where the technocracy isn't going to be so powerful here in the next 5 years as it seems to be rolling out. So lots of interesting ideas, and I like the concepts of self-sustainability. He talked a little bit about permaculture, taking this permaculture class, and he's really living the philosophy by wanting to move down to Mexico and create a community down there that can be separate from this larger system, and it doesn't have to participate in the technocracy. So he is living his philosophy. That kind of integrity you don't see very often. So again, just really happy to have had this conversation with Derrick. I think a lot of us have a lot to learn from his point of view, and certainly from his passion. And the fact that as I was writing that introduction, I'm just realizing that he's done so much, from writing books to writing blog posts to producing documentaries and videos and podcasts and music, but also doing a lot of political activism, including the run for mayor, which I don't think we talked about in the interview just now, but he ran for mayor of Houston. Not really expecting to win, of course, but just to help get the word out about the 5G issue and the myriad of other issues from an alternative point of view, getting outside of the left-right paradigm and getting outside of the traditional corporate government narrative, and just educating people about the possibilities, what local community government could really be about. So it's just great that he does all of this work. I think we all have a lot to learn from him, so I urge you all to go to theconsciousresistance.com And check out what he's been doing. There's a lot of good stuff there. He's been really active for at least the last 10 years in the scene, so he's compiled quite a bit of work and a lot to learn from, especially this concept of agorism, this idea of just liberating yourself from the system, doing something completely different. So again, freedomcells.org if you want to look into the network, and theconsciousresistance.com for all of Derrick's work. Also thelast.americanvagabond.com, where he's getting published there, all of his journalism work, so you can find him there. And just to close it up, I will remind all of you that you've been listening to The Shift. I'm your host. My name is Doug McKenty. You can find my information at The Shift with Doug McKenty on YouTube or Facebook. I am at DMcKenty on Twitter, and of course you can find all of my work, including some of my older stuff, my older radio work, and this new podcast I'm working on with Transparent Media Truth called The Roundtable Discussions, plus all of the Shift episodes up at theshiftnow.com. So think about hitting that up and checking it out. I've been doing quite a bit of work trying to upgrade the website, so hopefully it's functioning a little bit better for everybody now. I'm about to start getting really busy myself, so please, think about hitting that subscribe button and joining for $6 a month, where you get the full-length interview and you get access to the membership forum. That would really help me out a lot and make it worthwhile to do this work. I'm fully dedicated at this point, but everybody's got to eat, so appreciate any help you might feel like giving on that front. And anyway, we'll see you again next week. I've got Tanner Cook coming up. We're going to talk about anarchy and Nietzsche. So it'll be a fun philosophy conversation. I haven't had a chance to really get down with anyone on Nietzsche in quite some time. So I'm looking forward to that one. And I hope you are too. Hope we'll see you back for that. So you all have a great week, and I hope you have a great day. And I'll see you again soon. Take care.